My name is Luke Brown, and this is a story about how Mexican labor was recruited to the United States Southwest. This presentation was prepared for the fall 2022 Intro to Chicanx Latinx Histories class at Pomona College. In the early 20th century, many agricultural companies in the U.S. Southwest recruited workers from Mexico. Mines, packing, railroads, and other profitable industries in the U.S. Southwest also exploited cheap, non-union Mexican labor. The Immigration Act of 1917, passed by Congress to limit immigration from countries outside Western Europe, was a threat to these companies. It was designed to limit or stop people outside Western Europe from entering the United States. It was intentionally racist and was seen by Congress as a way of preserving or enforcing a white U.S. society. The act created an immigration system like the one we have today. Because the act now made many things illegal, the government now also had to take a huge role in regulating immigration. The act also created huge barriers to legal Mexican immigration. Restrictions like entry fees and literacy tests were common, and companies were prohibited from recruiting laborers with contracts. This was a problem to companies that wanted cheap Mexican labor. The act, if actually enforced, would reduce the availability of workers they exploited. For the first time, Mexican laborers who had come to work in the U.S. would now be seen as illegal aliens. The companies decided to lobby the federal government, and they were immensely successful. Only 18 days after the act was passed, the U.S. Secretary of Labor suspended entry fees, literacy tests, and rules not banning contract labor. Even when the rules were reinstated later, most Mexican laborers could still enter, just illegally. Companies defied restrictions. Sometimes local governments didn't even attempt to enforce immigration laws. Employers did not face punishment for employing illegal immigrants, and it was Mexican workers who suffered both business exploitations and legal consequences. Cheap labor was all these companies really cared about. Over the next few decades, similar patterns would continue. Companies would still avoid labor regulations and lobby the government, claiming they needed cheap Mexican labor. The government would often comply with the lobbying or fail to enact any meaningful legislation regarding illegal immigrant employment. It took until 1986 for Congress to create sanctions against employers of illegal immigrants, and it took nearly 70 years for this to happen under the modern immigration system, enacted in 1917. By the 1930s, over 230,000 children of Mexican laborers had been born in the U.S. and become U.S. citizens. A 1939 press release by an important labor union, the United Cannery, Agricultural, Packing, and Allied Workers of America, references this. It talks about the threat of legislation that would deport huge amounts of illegal immigrants and references the, quote, many hundreds of thousands of Mexican laborers induced to cross the border who have worked and produced wealth in this country. To sum it up, Mexican workers and their families suffered because of how exploitative businesses and racist government policies encouraged labor recruiting to the U.S. Southwest. Thank you for listening.